Okay, a quick update here on the battle for Leros that I have going, or at least for the central portions in this scenario. So I played one full turn. Essentially, we had at the beginning of the turn we had 4 air sorties, 2 Messerschmitt 109s, and 2 Stuka dive bombers. I concentrated. I concentrated them on the Allied units and the Italian gun emplacement here, and they had no successes. Air sorties first have to find their target before they can make a roll. So you roll to find the target before you can make a roll to be effective upon the target. So some of them were found, and the ones that found weren't successful. Then essentially a unit moved around here. He got a spotter from here, was able to activate this battalion heavy mortars, which had no effect on his movement there. These 2 units opened fire at close range against this unit dug in the gun emplacement there with no effect, and their reply fire suppressed them. And 2 machine gun sections kind of exchanged fire here. Over here you can't see a thing. Essentially, the upshot of both sides' turns is that the British these units were able to see some of these. Well, essentially, we've got some suppressed on the British side. A suppressed stack there. They were moving into close combat here. They got suppressed. Then 2 stacks fired covering fire. One's managed to suppress these. They had no effect upon these, and the exchange of fire between these had no effect. 1 parachute stack managed to move up mainly under without being visible from many units on this side of the ridge, and has actually taken the summit of the ridge. Another stack moved up a little bit. I think that stack, I can't remember what it did now, but so there wasn't much movement. There was quite a lot of attempted suppressive fire actions from the paratroopers, which were not very successful. So I can see in this, so because every hex of movement entails is an overwatch trigger, and any one stack can fire a suppressive fire action on an overwatch trigger. So every hex you move into, potentially you could be fired maybe from the same enemy stack or different enemy stacks, but only each hex you move into. So there was quite a lot of and then when a stack fires, that in turn entitles, when an overwatch fires, then the phasing player is entitled to a return fire. No, I think I might have that slightly wrong. But anyway, I played it right by the rules, but essentially what you get is you get a lot of exchanges of fire. So I see what MJ Lyon said in his report on the Frozen Hell game, that there's a lot of processing to be done every turn, because you have to go through the fire sequence each time. And what I quickly kicked in for me as my kind of standard practice with this is quick check at the fire tables shows that most rolls are not, especially at the firepower which we have at present on the board here, are not going to receive any results. So I always roll before I check the tables and the mods and everything, and if the roll is entirely low, I don't bother checking. Only when it's sort of getting to the mid to high range is any of it going to come effect. So that cuts down some of the table checking, but there still is quite a lot for a few units moving. And what it tells me is this, I think, is realistic. If you start moving, especially in the open where people can see you, you're going to bring down a lot of fire upon you. And so for any movement to be successful, I'm going to have to find ways, A, to suppress the enemy first, or to move out of sight, or somewhere where their shots are not going to have any effect. So, which brings me to the sort of next, to the main point that I'm thinking about this game. If we sort of go on a close-up here, is you can see all the contour lines there. It's a line of sight checking heavy situation. I'm going to have to do lots of checkings of lines of sight, and so that is making me scratch my head and thinking, right, in the version 3 rules, I think there's two ways of checking line of sight. One is that you just consider every level as a pancake, so it's pancake upon pancake upon pancake, which is kind of relatively simple. The other is where you take the hex dot in the middle and you work out how far it is between, because there's 20 meters between each hex normally. You divide the distance between that and that into 4, and then you work out which quarter that hex center hex dot, if that's one you're checking, is in that 4. And then, say if it's exactly in the middle, then you say, okay, that's 2 quarters, so a quarter of 20 meters is 5, so that's 10 meters. That dot is 10 meters higher than that elevation. So that's the kind of standard way of checking it in these rules, and I think that's the way I'm going to go with it. But you can see that requires quite a lot of computation each time you check, especially if you've got a fellow here and you're wondering if a fellow is slightly around the corner. There might be several points in which you can check, but fortunately these rules say you can only you just go ahead and fire, and it's up to the opposite side to say, I contest that, choose one contested hex, and if that blocks line of sight, that shot cannot happen. If it doesn't block line of sight, that you cannot contest another hex. So I only have to actually check once each operation, but I do need to be careful about which one I check. So it's going to be a bit line of sight checking heavy, but of course that means that the effort I put into this in this game is going to help me in more scenarios of this game and in every game really that I have to check line of sight, to take that time and effort, get used to those computations. So that's the sort of two things that I that stay with me from that first turn, is the amount of line of sight checking that is going to be required, A, in this game, but B, particularly this scenario, and C, the amount of fire which can happen in any one movement, and any fire action that you perform invites a return fire immediately from your opponent, and then you can appreciate that then in your opponent's part of the phase, any fire that he does invites you firing back. So there's going to be a heavy volume of fire for every bit of movement or maneuver that you do, and that is interesting. It's a bit different, feels different from other games, tactical games that I've played, because it feels like I'm going to have to be a lot and I'm just going to feel that burden of fire, and so any movement is not going to be as simple as it might be in other games. Okay, so I think that's all I can say at the moment. Just a quick update on my first impressions of the first game turn of my first proper try of TCS.